And we're back with more of our CBS News Battleground tracker. Anthony Salvanto is our Director of Elections. Anthony, let's start with the Republicans. Below the top line number, what's the most important thing happening in that race right now?
Trump coming back in Iowa to retake the lead. Cruz had it last month. He does this by, number one, hanging on to his own support, which he's right about this. It has been remarkably durable. And then he's gained with evangelicals. He's gained with Tea Party voters. Interestingly, doing better throughout the week of polling. Maybe those endorsements early in the week, maybe the Palin endorsement, the criticism of Cruz, certainly didn't hurt.
So he's holding on to his base and taking a little from Ted Cruz's base. Let's now switch over to the Democrats. What's your big takeaway, other than those top line numbers? What's really driving voters on that side of the race?
Behind Bernie Sanders catching up is a feeling there's among voters that his critiques of Hillary Clinton about too many ties to big donor money seem to be resonating. Most Democrats feeling that she might side with big donors over regular people, so it appears that his line of attack there is catching on, at least in Iowa and New Hampshire.
All right, we'll be right back with much more. We're back with Anthony Salvanto, Director of Elections here at CBS. So, Anthony, let's go back to Iowa, where they're going to start voting in 8 days. I can't believe it. Cruz was up 9 points in December. Now Trump is up 5. Cruz has been making a lot of attacks on Trump, saying he's not a consistent conservative. He doesn't believe what you believe. If that would work anywhere, it would seem that Iowa would be the place, but it's not working.
It's not, except that this is not necessarily an ideological election. This is about who can change things. This is about who can fix things. And Trump is ahead of Cruz on those measures. If you look at people who say they want the economy fixed, that's the number one thing behind Donald Trump's support. Cruz's support is more concentrated in people who say that they want a president who will defend their faith and defend their religion. That's important in Iowa. The evangelical vote, always important in Iowa, but it's not quite a large enough slice. It's not quite enough of a voting bloc to put him now past Donald Trump. Plus, you add in the fact that Trump has cut into Cruz's lead with evangelicals, cut into it with the Tea Party support, and that adds up then to that Trump lead.
What do we know about the Trump voters, their characteristics?
Well, they've been remarkably durable. I mean, there was one thing he said in your interview with him about the loyalty. He is right about that. In fact, we've been re-interviewing people on this panel throughout the fall. You and
tracking them over time.
Yeah, you and I sat here in September and we talked about Donald Trump's support. Well, we've re-interviewed some of those same people, and they're still with him. In fact, over 90%. Once they come to Donald Trump, they stay there. And so even as the other candidates jockey around, he keeps his.
That number, 90%, put that in context, say, relative to somebody else. I mean, is anybody that up in the 90s, anywhere close?
No, because they've all then shifted around, right? Cruz took from Carson and others, you know, down in the Rubio is pulled from Bush, et cetera, et cetera. But nobody has matched that. At the same time, though, you know, Trump will eventually perhaps need to grow that base a little bit, and maybe he has some challenges there.
Yeah, what are his challenges?
Yeah, I think that when you look at people who aren't with him, as has often been the case, you know, they say they'd have a hard time considering him. And many of them find him to be out of the mainstream. So if he's going to if the rest of the field were to consolidate a little bit and he needs another 5 or 10%, how does he get those people? That remains, I think, a challenge for him. And of course, turnout is always a big challenge in Iowa. We did ask people, do you know where your caucus location is? That's kind of the first thing to know. And Trump's people say that they do.
Now, that's crucial because if you know where the caucus is, you're likely to go. And that's the big question for somebody who's bringing in new voters, presumably.
Exactly, exactly.
Let's talk about the other states that you looked at. Florida, Texas. How's it looking in other states?
Well, it looks like the rest of the nation, which is a lot of Trump lead. So in Florida, he is up big. In Georgia, he is up. And in Texas, he is, it's Ted Cruz. That's his home state, right? And you look at Florida, that looks a lot like what the rest of the country looks like, where Marco Rubio, then, who's from Florida, of course, he's down there. He's in third place. So competitive. But the big picture here, John, is that you want to look at this whole thing as a delegate fight that is going to go on for a few months. We're going to make a big deal out of Iowa, out of New Hampshire, but as we get into March, these things, all these delegates are going to be up for grabs, and this is the early part of February is only like 5% of the delegates we're looking at here.
Right. Let's switch over to the Democratic side. Bernie Sanders it's neck and neck, but Bernie Sanders has got the momentum. What's behind it? You said basically they're listening to his attacks about Wall Street on Hillary Clinton.
They are, and they seem to be finding resonance. So I mentioned earlier that a majority of Democrats in Iowa think that Hillary Clinton might side with big donors over regular people, whereas 91% of them feel that Bernie Sanders would side with regular people over big donors. You know, there's another part of this too. You notice, of course, the race has gotten a little more heated in recent days, right? They each have been critiquing each other. Well, marginally, Iowa Democrats feel that Bernie Sanders' critiques on Hillary Clinton have been fair, whereas less so that Hillary Clinton's attacks on Bernie Sanders have been fair. In fact, even many of Hillary Clinton's supporters feel that Bernie Sanders makes fair points about her.
Does she have something that she does that she can hang on to, that she should talk about, that voters seem to be listening to when it comes to her?
Absolutely, and it's electability. When you look at the people who want most of all to win in November, they are overwhelmingly with her, like 75%, okay? But then we also look at who wants to shake up the system. Bernie Sanders gets those voters. Who wants to get progressive things done? And Bernie Sanders gets those voters. So in very liberal Iowa and also in very liberal New Hampshire, those things really have appeal, and that's what's bolstering him at this point.
What about, so the electability suggests there is a realistic mindset among Democrats. The Hillary Clinton camp is trying to paint Bernie Sanders as too idealistic, too pie in the sky. Do they have any chance to make inroads on that argument?
For her voters, that's working. We asked this, and they actually see Bernie Sanders as unrealistic, right? As idealistic, actually,
right.
Okay? Whereas his voters do tend to see him as realistic. So they've bought into this. They've bought into this. But at the same time, then you look at where Bernie Sanders is doing well. He's doing well across a very broad spectrum of voters. Of course, young people, to your point, they might be first-time voters. And I think one of the things we really have to watch here, as always, is turnout. If his support is too concentrated in eastern Iowa, right, this is a delegate fight. And as folks watch this, they should note that in Iowa, you're competing for delegates all across the state. And if his support is too concentrated among young people, eastern Iowa, he could fall short with delegates.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thanks so much for being with us.